Welcome to Hallway Conversations. Some of the best interactions at technical conferences are often the impromptu conversations that occur in the hallways between the formal sessions. Hallway Conversations is an intermittent podcast that tries to capture the spirit of those conversations and package it in a format that can be shared with the entire community. Now, let's get ready for our next conversation.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on what time it is when you're listening to this. Welcome to another episode of Hallway Conversations. I'm joined today by two of my co-hosts, Steve and Boland. Steve, how are you?
I'm doing good.
Good. Did your gloves ever come in, by the way?
As a matter of fact, they did, both pairs, so I can feel my fingers again.
You wear both pairs at the same time, or you
No,
just
no,
needed a backup?
no. I got the second pair so that if I make the same mistake and lose the first one again, I've got a backup that's handy and nearby.
Yeah. Backup would have helped me with my laptops that got stolen, but that's a whole other story. Lee, how are you doing? Lee Brandt.
Outstanding.
Fantastic. And I am Phil Japixi, and we're joined today by Esteban Garcia. Esteban is the founder and chief technologist at Nebbia Technology, an ALM consulting and Azure-powered technology company. He is a software developer with a passion for ALM, TFS, Azure, and software development and Agile best practices. Esteban is a Microsoft Visual Studio ALM MVP and ALM Ranger, Pluralsight author, and the president of OneTug, Orlando.net user group. Esteban, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. We always appreciate when people take time away from the family and kids and work and everything to come on and share their wisdom with our listeners. So really appreciate you coming on.
No, definitely. Thanks for inviting me. I love talking about this stuff, and really enjoy listening to the podcast. So I'm happy to contribute to it.
Oh, fantastic! So we've had a couple shows already on Agile. I'm going to call them specialty topics, right? So we talked with Stephen Rogowski, good friend of ours, on story mapping, an area that I'm very passionate about. We had Troy Tuttle on talking about Lean and Kanban. But you and I were talking down at South Florida Code Camp, and it occurred to me we didn't really just have a show on Agile. You know, why Agile? Why does it matter? And things like that. And you pretty much live in that world doing Agile consulting and transformation. So, you know, I thought, gosh, what a great guest to have on, you know, with your wealth of experience and even, you know, with the stuff you've been doing with Visual Studio ALM. And maybe we can touch on some of the Agile improvements within TFS, because I know TFS has gotten a really bad rap over the years, but it's really gotten a whole lot better.
Yeah, definitely. It's come a long way. It's not just with the tool, but also with the way that they're deploying things, and they've really started to live an agile way within the team. So yeah, definitely. You know, when you look at agile and why people are doing it and why people are starting to go down that path, if you've seen the last few years how we've gone from Agile just being something that people sort of talked about, and now it's really hit, I guess, a critical mass. I'm no longer getting the calls saying, "Hey, what's Agile? Come show us what Agile is." Now the calls that I get is, "Hey, come help us succeed with Agile. You know, we've started going down this path. Come help us get better at that." So it's really interesting to see the transformations that have happened in the past few years.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, you know, I'm not a huge fan of Gartner because it seems a little too academic for me, but I know a couple years ago Gartner had declared Agile mainstream. And I'm not really sure what that means, but I think you're right. I think it backs up the fact that more and more people are aware of it. It's not just the fringes. I know early on, and I've been doing this for a long time as well, and I know Steve and Lee have also. In the early days, everybody thought Agile, not everybody, but a lot of the we'll call them mainstream developers thought Agile was, you know, 4 or 6 people wearing a lot of hemp and Birkenstocks and holding hands and singing Kumbaya 2 weeks at a time. And you know, we're like really, really worried about what this was going to mean. So when a customer calls you and says, well, let's back up, let's do the elevator pitch, right? You've got, you know, a company that calls you up and says, hey, this Agile thing, everybody seems to be doing it. It seems to be working. It's not a fad. What is it? You know, what is the elevator pitch that you would give to somebody about how you define Agile?
Well, let me back up a little bit. So a lot of times where a lot of the phone calls I get, they may be, hey, I just sent my whole team to get certified in Agile and it's not working. Come help us. right? So that's a lot of times people just assume that, hey, you go take the 2-day class, 3-day class, and you come back and everything just works, right? So a lot of the conversations I have is first get a good understanding of why they want to go down the agile path. What are the problems that they're having with, and it ranges from, hey, we have some code with not very good quality, a lot of bugs, or hey, we're missing a lot of our deadlines, or our budget is really going out of whack, to we have no clue what we're building, right? So the pitch goes pretty much that, hey, you use Agile to define what it is that you're building right now, and so that as you're building it, you're able to change the target if needed, or make sure that you are delivering value on a consistent basis. So don't get concerned with adding all the bells and whistles on the first week, but hey, make sure that you're adding value every time, you're delivering value, and you're giving your team the ability to switch gears if needed. Some of the things that we talk about is Agile is not just Scrum, or Agile is not just this process that you follow. Really, Agile is all about making sure that your developers, your testers, really the whole team gets immersed in doing all these practices. So if your team goes in and starts following Scrum, okay, that's great. But are they doing unit testing? Are they doing continuous integration? Are they doing all the Agile software development practices that are going to get them successful with Agile? So that's a lot of the things that we talk about.
Yeah, and I think at the core of it, and I think you hit on it, but one of the phrases I like to use when I'm talking to customers or people that come to my talks or training classes is that rapid feedback loop, and really making sure that you're not living in the dark. We spent so many years in this industry developing software 2 years at a time. And, we'd go have a JAD session, right? And I'm sure you guys remember that, the joint application design. And we get all these people in a room and whiteboard. And the end result of that is a 200-page requirements document. And then the engineering team would go away for 2 years and come back and go, ta-da, here it is, right? And it was never anywhere close to what the customer wanted.
Exactly, or it could be exactly what the customer wanted, but it was what the customer wanted 2 years ago. Things change. I mean, everything is changing. From the corporations, the leadership in the company might change, and they might want something else, or there could just be some things that the state or whatever agency that they have to listen to tells them it has to be different, right? So by following an agile process allows them to make sure that they're able to put themselves in a position to make those changes and not wait a year or 2 years.
Yeah, that's a great point. So what are some of the techniques or the tips that you go in when you talk to a customer about a transformation or, trying to become more agile? And I just felt like I just said 27 cliches all in a row. But what are some of the approaches you use that people can apply?
Well, sort of depends what the problem is, right? So the first thing I go in and take a look, I do somewhat of an assessment, talking to different groups. If it's a really large organization, it's going to be a much bigger type of assessment. If it's a small team, 10 developers or 10 people on the team, you're able to figure out what the problems are relatively quickly, right? So we take a look at what is the process they're following. Are they following Scrum? Are they following Kanban? Okay, or are they following whatever else, right? So if they tell me that is the thing that they're following, are they following it to the T? One of the problems that I see a lot is that people say, well, we're following Scrum, but we're not doing stand-ups, or we're not doing retrospectives. And so the first question is like, why aren't you doing those things? Like, well, we didn't really think that they were going to be important to us. So I'm a big believer of starting with the basics, making sure that you follow things the way they were meant to first, and then start tweaking things to make sure that they fit your team, right? So it's not a cookie cutter thing where everyone has to follow the process exactly the same way. But you do yourself a disservice if you say, yeah, we're going to do it, but we're only going to take the pieces that we like. And I see that quite a bit. So that's usually one of the first things that I look at.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, because I hear so many people that, they're doing Scrum, but, as you said, or what I like to call it, Scrum or Fall. Right?
Yes.
They're just doing the same thing they were doing 2 weeks at a time. And I had one customer who was like, well, and they were exactly what you said. We're not doing stand-ups because we didn't see value in them. And I like it. I always dropped a comparison with martial arts, and I studied and taught martial arts for, a vast number of years, more than I want to actually mention on the air. And one of the things that when you start out, it's not the wax on, wax off crap you see in the movies, but there are katas or forms that you do, and it's rote memorization. You're going to do these 15 techniques in a row in this pattern. It's almost a dance, if you will. And, is that something that you're going to take into a fight or a defense? No, but you know what it's doing? It's the repetitive motion to really get to understand the different movements. And then once you get past yellow belt, orange belt, and in the beginnings, then you start to be able to say, well, you know what? This technique doesn't work for me. I'm not going to use it that much. This other technique's really good and is helpful. And now I can start to custom tailor it.
Yeah, certainly. And then once you have the process down and you know that you're doing things in a repeatable way, right? Exactly like you said, you already have all the motions down and you know exactly what comes next. Then you start looking at the software development process, right? So once you get the agile process down, then I work with the teams to make sure that they have the software development practices down, right? So it's not good enough that you are just following Scrum, for example, or you're following Kanban, but you need to make sure that you and your developers and the whole team are following a process that's going to help you in your agile transformation or in your agile process, right? And some of those things are unit testing, right? That's the first thing that people think is like, well, that's more code that I need to write. How's that going to make me better? How's that going to make me faster? But then you start talking about the great benefits of unit testing and whether you're following a true TDD or not, but really just having those unit tests gives you so much value as you're trying to deliver things faster, making sure that you're not breaking things. Things like continuous integration. One of the things that we try to achieve with Agile is to make sure that you have a deliverable software at the end of every iteration, right? Something you can, if you want to push it out to production. How do you know that you're going to have that if you're not continuously building your software and running tests? You don't want to get to the end of a sprint, or you don't get to the end of the iteration and then find out that, oops, I can't deploy this because I don't have the right system to build it, right? So those are things that are relatively easy to implement. They seem pretty daunting when you first do them, but once you get them going, they give you so much value that those are things that I usually help teams achieve pretty quickly.
So one of the things I've always been challenged by with Agile in general is that there is sort of the prescriptive Agile, and that's the sort of Scrums and Kanbans of the world and so on that have a fairly detailed and fairly coherent process that you follow, and yet at the same time, a lot of the challenges that you often see with sort of more, with a lot of Agile adoptions is that not all of, let's say, Scrum, for example, just, to pick on one of these methodologies, right? Not all of the situations you find yourself in are necessarily situations where all of Scrum is necessarily beneficial. And one of the challenges that I think is when we talk about sort of successful Agile adoption, right? And your sort of standard engagement is people call you and say, well, we sent people to training, but it's just not working for us. The challenge you have is that in order to really, and kind of in a sense, Phil, this goes back to your martial arts analogy, right? The neophyte practitioner of either martial arts or Scrum, let's say, isn't really qualified yet to be able to say, this we're not going to do, not because it's too hard, but this we're not going to do because it's just simply not applicable to our situation, right? I mean, they lack the context and the experience to be able to make good judgments about that. And so oftentimes what you end up with is people that are sort of chopping out the parts that are just too challenging, and they tend to be too challenging, sort of for organizational reasons and political reasons within companies and that sort of a thing. But the challenge, I guess, is how do you get to a state, and maybe the answer is you hire someone like yourself, Esteban, to come in who does have the expertise as a sort of Agile coach, approach. But how do how do you get to the point where you're able to make sort of intelligent, informed decisions about the parts of a particular practice that are appropriate and are going to be beneficial versus those that you're just sort of cargo culting without thinking about it, kind of a thing? And I guess the other challenge is that when you juxtapose that against the studies that are out there about things like the Dunning-Kruger effect and so on, where beginners think they know a lot more than they do, and experts tend to devalue their experience because they know all the things they don't know. In that context, it's challenging, it seems to me, for a process like Agile to be successful, where you don't want people cargo culting it, but at the same time, you to not cargo cult it runs the risk of kind of cutting things out when you're not really qualified to know which things are safe to cut out in your particular situation. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely makes sense. So I guess the self-serving answer is yes, call me. But I mean, the truth, but truthfully, it takes practice. I mean, you really, it is about doing it and figuring out what works, what doesn't work, and in which situations you don't need to do one of the things, right? One of the things I really like about Scrum, and you're right, I don't apply it on every situation, but its prescriptive model allows you or any team to pick it up and just say, okay, we're going to follow these rules and we're going to do it again, and we're going to do it over and over and over until we get really good at it. Once you get good at it, you start looking back, and during your regular retrospectives, you look back and say, okay, well, what's working? What if we tweak this? What if we don't meet every day? Let's meet every couple of days. What if we do our stand-ups, instead of doing at 9 a.m., we do them at 2 p.m., whatever it might be that you want to change. But without you having gone through those spaces and looking back to see what works for your team, you're doing yourself a disservice by removing those things, right? So, but totally to your point. I mean, once you start doing something, you start learning it, you're gonna go back and know what you don't know, what's working and what's not working.
One of the things that I talk about a lot, and I heard Dan North talk about this in one of his talks years ago, and it keeps coming back to me, is the Dreyfus model for skill acquisition, right? So there's 5 levels of skill acquisition, 5 levels that people go through when they were acquiring a new skill. And the very first level is that beginner level, and really what beginners need is recipes to follow, right? So the idea that someone might, and I am not a big believer in the whole Scrum or the whole Kanban thing. I am a big believer in picking and choosing what's right for your organization. But unless you've gone through that beginner level of following the recipe, there's no way you can start to challenge that. And like Esteban says, if you've got a history of going through the motions of working that thing, then you can start and tweak it and start to see how it affects your process, right? If we got rid of the stand-up, does that make us faster or slower? Does that make the software better or worse? Does that affect the software in any way whatsoever? And without that kind of history behind you, there's no way for you to continuously improve and get better. That's what the whole point of this whole thing is supposed to be, to continuously get better and continuously challenge that. Do we continue to do this? I mean, stand-ups is one of those things that I think is kind of a perfect thing, but for the most part, it fits a problem, right? If your team isn't talking on a regular basis, then stand-ups are a way to help get your team talking regularly on a regular basis. And does that mean they need to talk every day? Maybe not. But if you start with, let's talk every day, then your team can figure out what's a good time for you guys to talk every day, or every week, or every other day.
Yeah, definitely. And you touched on some points there where you want to be able to keep improving and looking to see how things, as you change things, how is that affecting your productivity or you getting things done, right? So that's where we start looking at some metrics. What are the things that we need to be measuring as we're doing these things, right? And it's not, hey, go out and start capturing every metric that you can so that you can just have them somewhere so someone can look at them and you can show some executive and say, hey, look, we have metrics, right? It's really more about making sure you're capturing the right things. How fast are we going? Hey, we just changed this. Are we going faster? Are we going slower? How many bugs do we have? Hey, we just changed this other thing. Are bugs getting better or getting worse, and things like that? So, it's once you start looking at the whole process as a whole and seeing how's the whole process affecting your quality? How is it affecting your throughput? You're able to start making those decisions and really not just do it because, well, sort of like a gut feel type thing where, well, we think this is going to do it. Well, let's look at the numbers and make sure that it's actually doing what we think it's going to do.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a bit like software. If I think that this is the problem, then I change that and I run the program again and see if that was the problem. If I change four things and it fixed it, I still have no idea which one of those four things fixed the problem. So changing one thing at a time and managing to measure, and this goes back to what Phil said earlier about short feedback cycles. The shorter your feedback cycle, the quicker you'll know whether something's affecting your speed or your ability to deliver for better or for worse. So what are some of the things that when you go to a client, what are some of the things that you get them measuring? How do you get them measuring their throughput or their speed?
Well, depending on what process they're following, right? So if they're following Scrum, then we take a look at their velocity. How many stories are getting delivered every sprint, and then obviously we go back to what is a story point. So we measure that. We take a look at bugs. How many bugs are being carried forward after every sprint? That's good measure of quality. We look at test cases. So that's even outside of the Scrum process. How many test cases do we have? What does our what does our code look like from a test case perspective? Are we passing all our test cases? Are we running them every night? Right. So now we're going into build automation and test automation, right? And it could be that you have 1,000 test cases, but only 20% of your code is being covered by those test cases. So that's probably not a very good number. So we want to focus into moving that a little higher up. Some of the things that we've been looking at now that some of these agile practices are moving more into the DevOps side of things is how quickly could we release? If we say, hey, we want to release today, how quickly can we get from someone saying release until we're fully released to production? So those are a few different things that we look at. Now that also if those metrics don't mean anything to an organization, then we say, you know what, we don't care about releasing as fast as we can because we just don't do that all the time. So we don't capture those metrics that don't mean anything to us, right? But definitely, to get started now, if we are following a Kanban approach, now instead of looking at how many user stories or story points you're delivering every sprint, you see how many stories or how many cards are getting moved across the board, on a weekly basis, or how many things do you have ongoing at any particular time, and you may want to increase those or lower them depending what it is that you're looking for. But yeah, it's at the end of the day, it sort of goes back to throughput and quality, right? Are we going fast? And are we going fast while not breaking our code, right? So and so a lot of the metrics go surround that.
Okay. So the other thing, and I just got done with a coaching gig with a company this last week, and one of the things that we talked about was their agile process, and they're doing really well within the IT team. But one of the things that they're having a hard time doing is getting the rest of the organization involved. So the problem that they're having is that their work is constantly being interrupted by other tasks outside of the things that they've brought into this sprint. And so one of the suggestions I made was to make it visible to the organization, either making another ticket type, or when you report on your sprint activity, report that these are other story points that weren't brought into the sprint that came through an expedite column or whatever. And the response back was the fact that the organization isn't really involved. They don't have any of the project managers coming to the daily stand-ups or the sprint planning meetings. They don't have any of the upper management taking a look at their board or looking at the work that they're doing. All they do is look at the same numbers that they have looked at in the past. Is this is the project that we want delivered. We're giving you 15 months to do it. At the end of that 15 months, if it isn't done, then you're in trouble. So are there techniques that you've used to try and get the organization involved, or have you seen this problem before?
Yeah, definitely. I'm actually working with an organization that has a similar problem right now. And some of the things that I like to do is, well, first, Agile is one of the great things about it is that it makes things very transparent, sometimes painfully transparent, but it makes it very transparent, right? So if a team says, typically, managers or upper management are going to expect that developers or the teams are going to be working 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week. That's their productivity, right? But if you start talking about, okay, let's talk about reality. So if you look at the previous sprint or previous iteration, or if you're not following iterations, if you look at the previous month, and you're able to measure how much time were you involved on things that were outside of your project, and let's say that 30% of the team's time was involved in solving tickets or production issues or whatever that may be that's outside of project work, and you start talking about, okay, well, this team's real capacity is really 5 hours a day, and and so that's across the week. That's you really we only have 25 hours a week, and you're able to show that, hey, we know that we made all these estimates based on us working 40 hours a week, but that's just impossible because of all these other things that are happening. So then now you start putting some, I guess, dollar figure to all the extra, not just the extra work that's coming in, but how is that impacting the whole project, right? Because whenever you talk to people outside of IT or the people signing the checks, right, they care about how's this affecting the bottom line. Are we? I'm paying for this much development, but I'm only getting 60% of that or 70% of that. And then you're able to have the conversations. Well, maybe we can bring additional people in that are only focused on these extra things that are outside of the regular project work, or we live in reality and we know that, hey, this the development team that you have is 60-70% capable of doing project work because the rest of the time we're solving the company's problems, right? And then you can start digging down into, okay, why are we getting so many production issues or bugs or whatever it may be that they're focusing on. It could be a code quality issue. Maybe, hey, we need to spend a little time fixing this up, and that investment is going to pay off by us not having to spend so much time fixing things, right? So it's really about looking at what the output is, making sure that people don't see Agile, or even if you're not following Agile, but really making sure that people don't see this as, hey, they're following Agile, so it's a magic bullet, it's all going to work. It's really, hey, we're following Agile, and now because of this, we're able to give you all these very transparent things that are happening within the team.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad there's something that you said, and I'm glad you brought it up, let's live in reality. Because what generally seems to happen if you're not following at least some sort of agile process to make things transparent, let's say a project starts to get behind schedule. Generally, two people do two different things, right? So the developers want to now adjust the timeline because they know they're going as fast as they can go without sacrificing code quality, at least. And so they want to adjust the timeline and say, okay, based on how fast we're going, here's the new deadline. Here's when we're going to be done with this new thing. And project managers seem to want to try and twist reality to fit the original plan, right? Yep. So they want to try and figure out, how can we bring more people in so that we can make the original estimate? How can we adjust, some sort of reality adjustment to get us back on schedule? So one of the things that I always yell at people about is opening up Microsoft Project. My apologies to the Microsoft Project team, but so what are your thoughts on tools? And because everybody has their favorite tools. The argument in Kanban is always physical boards versus virtual boards, and I'm sure it is in Scrum as well. What are some of the first tools that you might bring in for an organization that may be struggling with an agile transformation?
Yeah, so the tools is always interesting, right? So when someone is first learning Agile, I typically recommend that they even stay away from tools and understand the process, the way it should be, the way it's going to work for your team, and then bring a tool in and tweak it if needed to make sure it fits the way you're going to follow it, right? So I'm a big Visual Studio ALM guy, so TFS guy. So I usually go down that path using TFS. Earlier we talked about how far the tools within TFS have come from the agile perspective. So yeah, that's usually my go-to tool, if you will. And most of the time I'm working with Microsoft Shop, so that's usually the path we go. But there's lots of tools out there that can help you with Scrum or Kanban. There's Lean Kit is a great tool that's out there. But you can even get pretty far with something like Trello if you just want to have a way to see tasks moving forward, right? I'm not a big believer on physical boards. I know I'm gonna get some hate email over that one, but I just we live in a world where people are not always working in an office or working together in the same room. Everyone that works with me is somewhat remote. So and I'm always have the fear of someone walking by the board and knocking something over, right? So I think they work, and I think it's good to get started with, but they can only take you far enough. Once you get enough people, or just you get the one person that's going to be working from home, you need something that's electronic. But there's, like I said, there's quite a few tools out there. Atlassian has some really good tools out there as well. But like I said, my main tools of choice are the TFS ALM tools, and that's most of the consulting that I do is around that.
Okay. Well, and I'll just put my 2 cents in. I'm a big believer in physical boards, and the only reason and with remote teams, obviously it's a challenge, and that's the sticking point for me. But for physical boards, for me, just means that there's absolutely no way someone can ignore them, especially if it's a wall that you've got sticky notes on, or this particular team has their sticky notes on their boss's window. So there's absolutely no way that their boss can ignore what's going on in their process. Whereas if I give you an electronic board, you actually have to physically go to that URL in order to see the board. Whereas if there's a bunch of tickets in a big empty column because there's a bunch of stuff, let's say the whole QA team took the week off to go to some QA symposium, obviously the tickets are going to back up, and someone's going to walk by and notice, why is there nothing going on in QA? Because the board really kind of radiates information. But yep. That's just my 2 cents.
No, I completely agree with that one, and that's one of the you see a lot of trends of people trying to mimic the physical board, right? They might put a big TV with the board, electronic board, or have they create a dashboard and things like that. So yeah, a lot of people are trying to mimic that, because you're right, that whole information radiation coming from somewhere that you having no way to miss the information, it's great. So there's a lot of value to it, and mostly just the way I work with so many remote people, and it just works out better with me from the electronic side of things. And one thing that to address the thing that where people might miss that things are moving or not moving is, we do daily stand-up. So every day we're going to be addressing the board and looking at it. So definitely taking the time to make sure that you are looking at things, or you don't just have a board for show, if you will, or just so people update them and then eventually you look at them. Whether you have a physical board or electronic board, you should be getting into the practice of looking at it or addressing the board more than once a day.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a outstanding point, that when conversations happen about the process, they should be happening around whatever tool you're using to establish that information. So
yeah, certainly. Sorry, one thing that I started touching on that a little bit, but one thing that I've started to see quite a bit is not just Agile focusing on the development side of things, but starting to move away to other things, right? So DevOps is the first thing where you're seeing quite a bit of it's like say help desk, or even just people doing production support, or just something like Scrum doesn't really work for that, but something like Kanban works perfect for that. And so we're starting to see Agile going outside of where it started, from the software development side of things, right? I'm hearing organizations trying to adopt it on the marketing teams. Here in Orlando, where By the way, it's not snowing. We have a group, Agile Orlando, and we meet every couple of weeks. We have something called Lean Coffee. So we meet for coffee every couple of weeks, and I think so. This is done in other cities as well. But anyways, one of the people that goes there, they're an architectural firm, and they're doing Agile to do architectural stuff, right? So it's pretty interesting to see Agile just going in other places. And obviously, Scrum and Kanban, they started in something completely outside of software development, but it's just interesting to see organizations starting to see the value of it and starting to apply it in other things outside of what we do on a regular basis.
So I'm curious, how does your architectural firm even become aware of Agile? Just out of curiosity, do you happen to know sort of like what was their initial introduction to it? I mean, do they have folks who sort of move in software engineering circles as well, or do you know how they sort of came to even be aware of it?
I'm not 100% sure exactly how they became aware of it. I mean, the problem that they are trying to solve is similar to what we're trying to do. They have all these things that run over budget, and they want to make sure that they're what we're trying to do. But how did they get wind of it? I'm not sure. I'll ask that next time. But it's just very interesting that seeing it in industries like that.
Yep.
For those who don't know, Steve came to the software world from an architecture background.
Oh, really? That's interesting. Maybe I'll put you in touch with this guy.
Well, I mean, certainly I can see, I think to your point, right, to your broader point, there are aspects and elements of Agile that fit very nicely with the process of software engineering in terms of the things that need to get done and the way they need to get done. But it's also true that Agile fits a lot of other things that in a sort of coarse grained comparison have a lot of similarities. So in the case of architecture, you are still creatively problem solving. You still have to decompose large units of work into smaller units of work. You still aren't really ever done in the sense that you can always, design it a little better, move a wall a little further over here, those sorts of things. So in the same way, there is a creative ingredient, but also a functional ingredient, right? So there's a creative artistic expression going on, but also a need for the thing to actually work, right? And so in a lot of ways, the tensions that go on during the architectural, design and ultimately, process of building the drawings to build the building, very similar in lots of ways to software. And so it does make sense to me that there could certainly be a value in the same kind of transparency, the same kind of feedback loop, the same kind of, are we on schedule, are we not on schedule, are we making progress, are we not, are we blocked because of some issue, are we not, and in the same kind of way, software engineering is a collaboration typically between multiple software engineers. Most architectural projects are collaborations between multiple architects, and so the parallels are many in terms of the kind of high order process. So I could definitely see how Agile could lend value to that. I'm just curious how does someone not in the software engineering field become even aware of it as a thing, right? And certainly I'm kind of, and the other reason I'm kind of curious about it is that Agile started out in software, but certainly the notions of Lean and Kanban did not, right? I mean, those started in manufacturing industries and were transposed to software after the fact, so to speak. And I'm curious kind of whether the architectural firm becomes aware of the process because they're looking at the broad space of process reengineering and are aware of things like Lean and Kanban, and through that discover Agile as a set of value propositions. I'm just it's just an interesting question whenever something that is very much within kind of our software engineering bubble or echo chamber. Anytime somebody outside that becomes aware of it, I'm always interested in discovering how and why and kind of what brought them to it, because it's we do live in a sort of relatively self-contained world in a lot of ways in our profession, and I'm just always interested in anytime things kind of break through those boundaries.
Steve, it sounds like you want to take the ball and go home.
No, not at all.
So Tom and Mary Poppendike always tell the story about the Empire State Building, and the building, the challenges of building that. And one of the things that I think it's a great example of is lean. Long before lean became lean, which came out of Toyota, right?
Yeah.
They only had a certain amount of space to store raw materials when they were building the Empire State Building. So they really had to plan precisely how much material they could build one floor at a time. So they had to make sure they had just the right amount of each material, based on the order of construction of things. Like, I guess the girders first and then the cement or whatever. You know more about that than I do.
Yeah.
But it wasn't the typical, or maybe it's not typical, but it wasn't just the job site where, all right, we need 400,000 tons of steel, so put that over there. And we need all this concrete, put that over at this other spot. They really had, like, every day they were bringing in supplies. The same thing happened, if I recall, with rebuilding the expressways in California after the big earthquake that interrupted the World Series that one year. And the guy that was in charge of that went on to much bigger and better things, but had rebuilt those expressways significantly under budget, significantly under the deadline, by adopting very much of a pool process or a lean process where he had planned it out so that, not like typical construction on the highway where they will block off 40 miles of highway to work on 10 feet at a time. He really did this rolling construction thing to maximize throughput.
Yeah.
So it has been out there, but you're right. I think the traditional Agile, as we look at it from a software thing, that is interesting to see other people adopt it. It's something that I do not as well as I would like with my kids. We've got a job board, and we've got to pull, they got to pull things through. And if they still have things in the to-do side of the board, they're not playing Xbox. They're not playing on the computer.
I've been working on that one, but it's not very successful yet.
It's hard. It's hard. It's and Mama has to buy into it, which is hard. So, but the one thing that I heard, and I know that Lee, you said a couple things that I just want to bring up again. You've been doing this for a long time, as all of us on this call. So we're at a point now where we can kind of sit back and see the lady in the red dress through all the ones and zeros, to borrow a Matrix reference. So when you said you want to come up to the Agile buffet and pick and choose what you want, you've got the experience to do that. But when you were first starting out and you didn't have any experience in this, and your experience was handed down from those who taught us in this industry, which was typically waterfall, I don't know that you would have been as successful picking from the Agile buffet because you really didn't know what you were trying.
Yeah.
The other thing, talking about boards, and I know there's a big debate about electronic, non-electronic, and I'm a big fan of paper and a big fan of Post-it notes as well, but I've also worked for global companies and, tried to run teams across 4 continents. And I'm sorry, but, pointing an iPad or a webcam at a wall and, that just didn't work. The bottom line is make sure you're measuring. And I don't care how you do it. If you've got a team that's co-located and you can have a board and all the stakeholders can actually see that board, then that's great. But if the stakeholders aren't in the same building, as is typical with, the big enterprises, then having just a board isn't going to quite do it. So you really need to figure it out. But at the end of the day, you can't improve it if you can't measure it. And I think that's the big thing, right? Because we've all gotten that requirement. The website has to be fast. And, you'll never meet that requirement, right? Because as fast as you make it, it's not going to be fast enough for the customer because you don't have anything measurable. So having a requirement that says the website has to be faster by 1 second round trip than the existing speed, that I can either make or not make based on technology, but at least it's measurable. And we all agree on whether or not we improved, right? So just make sure that you're measuring it. And that's part of that rapid feedback loop, right? So I'm going to measure it. I'm going to share those measurements. Esteban, you talked about TDD and continuous integration and continuous deployment. Well, you didn't actually mention continuous deployment, but by name, but I think you're referring to it.
Yep.
Those things are, again, that's measuring, right? That's that rapid feedback loop. How many bugs do we have? Well, how many my unit tests pass? Well, if my unit tests are all passing, that's that rapid feedback. Every time I do a check-in, I'm getting all green lights. I'm getting the feedback that, hey, I didn't break anything, right? I've measured my code quality. Again, it's going to be based on the quality of your tests, but it's a lot better than, hey, I hit F5 and it compiled.
Yeah.
Yeah, not only that, but taking those different metrics that you pick. So you take your metrics on your Kanban board, for example, what's your throughput, and then also look at your metrics on your unit tests, and then also look at your metrics on your automated builds, and you combine them together. You start finding trends. When we did this thing, then quality went up. When we did this thing, we started going faster. So not just looking at metrics on their own, but seeing how they all sort of correlate together. So it's really important. And again, that's one of the reasons why I like just having something electronic, because it just takes care of tracking those metrics for me. And then I can go back and do some analysis later.
Yeah, absolutely. And not just that, but using those same metrics, you can now start to make projections. So one of the all-time, I think, biggest kind of conflicts between IT and the rest of the organization is that there's no confidence in IT, right? So basically, as a history, what we've done is we've said, this is going to take 15 months to do. Now, nobody but us knows, well, we probably made it quite clear at the time that was an educated guess, right? We can't predict the future, and we're basically telling you this is our gut feeling on how fast we think we can get that done. But we can start taking those metrics, and now if I'm, for instance, in Kanban, if I'm measuring cycle times, I can now start to say, hey, based on the amount of stories that we have left and the size of those stories and the speed at which we've been getting those stories done, now I can start to tell you when I think we're really going to be done based on how fast we're actually going. Now I'm basing numbers on reality instead of on my gut feel. So the measuring part of it is, I think, the thing that everybody forgets because they want to just follow we'll do a stand-up, we'll do 2-week sprints, we'll do our sprint planning, we'll follow the rules of Scrum or Kanban, and then everything will just magically work out. But ultimately, you have to be able to measure all that stuff and take those measurements and do something useful with them, like being able to improve or being able to project. So,
yeah, when I'm talking to someone who's maybe not necessarily all the way sold on going agile and they're still sort of go back and forth, I remind them of that one project, or probably most of their projects, that very quickly got up to 90% done, and then it sort of stayed at 90% done for like 6 months, and that's pretty much how most projects are. Well, we're going there. We only have 10% left, and then all of a sudden that last 10% lasts forever, right? And so this is one of the things that sort of helps me drive home the value of agile and really measuring and really going back and looking to see where you really are versus that the perceived number that everyone has in their head.
okay, so two things that kind of come out of that. One of them is, how would you normally deal with, I mean, eventually you're going to come across a team where you've got a developer or developers or whatever position they might hold on the team that are not completely sold on Agile. They like doing the things the way they used to do them. They don't like writing unit tests. They don't like pair programming. They want to sit in their corner and have pizza slid under the door to them, right? They don't want to work as part of a team. So how do you normally deal with that?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, right? Because sort of agile can come show up in an organization a couple of different ways, right? It could be sort of like a homegrown thing where the team says, "Hey, we all love this agile idea, let's go for it," and they convince upper management that that's the way they want to go. Or it could be just a manager that decides, "Hey, this sounds interesting, let me tell the team this is the way we want to go." So, but at the end of the day, eventually there's going to be a collaboration between everyone to make it work, right? But what if you have that one person that doesn't want to go with where the team is going, right? A couple different ways, right? So I guess it depends on how friendly that person is. Not friendly in the sense of are they nice, but more like um, are they willing to come with the team, right? I mean, you could go with the angle of, well, I'm here because obviously your boss doesn't agree with you that what you're doing works, right? So I mean, by the time they call the
Yeah.
consultant, is because something's broken, right? To the fact that, hey, let's give it a try. Let's go down this path. Let's you sort of bring him on, maybe slowly, but once they start seeing that the whole team is going a certain path, and there's either maybe gonna get left behind doing something else, or maybe just left behind altogether, they might want to start coming to terms that this is the way you're gonna do it. But typically, once you start showing the gains that the team is doing, people come and get on board. It's But a lot of times you do have that one or more people who are that will push back. And as whenever I do agile coaching, my job is to help those people be successful and help them come along and show them how to be successful with this. I mean, a lot of times it could be someone who's been doing this for a long time and their way works, or maybe doesn't work, but that's the way they know. And it could be a fear thing of something new. And
Yeah.
it's just a matter of how you approach it, and how you bring it to them, and how you help them come along, and rather, instead of just saying, okay, well, this is going to be the way you do it, or you don't do it, right? So
Yeah.
yeah.
Do it or you're fired.
You can cure ignorance, right? I mean, if they are resistant because they don't understand it and they've heard the hype or whatever, that's one thing. If they're antagonistic, that's an HR problem.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, eventually there is going to be, no matter what it is. I mean, I'm sure once when Waterfall was coming along, many years ago, there were people that were saying, no, that will never work, and then now the same
Well,
thing
and they
with
would have been right.
of course.
Now they're all answer
Exactly. But there's always someone who's going to be pushing back, right? But like you said, Phil, some people are going to be pushing back, but willing to learn. But some people are just going to be pushing back, and will push back no matter what you tell them to do. And then that becomes is this a right fit for that person type problem.
Well, and I have had many, I won't say many, but over my coaching career, when I was still doing a lot of coaching, I've had several developers transition into non-development roles at the suggestion of their manager, because they would not, I mean, they dug their heels in and said, no, I'm not going to change how I do things. And their manager said, oh, look, we have an opening over here for you, right? And moved them off the team. So you just have to make sure the manager is involved. And unfortunately, if you're the consultant coming in and it's an FTE or a full-time employee, especially in the enterprise, that's going to require a lot of documentation. But you know what? The stand-ups are awesome at that, right? Because what I did was I started inviting, this one particular project, I started inviting the manager, development manager, to just be, and I hate the pig and chicken reference, but to be a chicken and to listen to our stand-ups. And after a week, he pulled me aside and said, so this, we'll call him Fred. So Fred has been, he said, let me get this straight. With the stand-up, you're talking about what you were working on and what you're going to be working on, if anything's holding you back, right? And I said, yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, we've kind of evolved beyond that, but that's it. He says, he's been working on the same thing for a week. He's still going to be working on it, but yet nothing is holding him back. And I said, yeah, that's what he's been reporting. So how big was this task that he's working on? And I said, well, 8 hours was the estimate. And he's like, well, who did the estimate? I said, well, he did. We let people, have input into their own estimates. And so that was, we're talking about transparency and rapid feedback loop, right? We've all known people over the years who have been able to bury themselves in a corner and hold on to their red swing line stapler and still get a paycheck for doing nothing, right? And the problem that these people have is when you start becoming agile and start being transparent and having this rapid feedback loop, you can't hide anymore, right? These people are found out and they have to either change or move on.
Yeah, that's one scenario. Then there's also these people, and I've seen them, and especially they're really prevalent in larger organizations that have figured out ways. So one of the things that we talk about in systems thinking is the more complex the system, the more complex the underground system becomes, right? So if there's lots of bureaucracy to get something done, then people are going to start making these underground back alley deals to get stuff done. And so there may be a person in the organization that's a rock star, not because they're the greatest developer or the greatest QA person, but because they've figured out how to get something done when nobody else could, right? And it's because they have figured out how to work the back alley deals and get stuff done despite the bureaucracy. So now, as a consultant, you're coming in and deciding to take away this bureaucracy and streamline the process. They are now on a level playing field with everyone else. They're no longer the rock star. So they start to feel their job security slipping away from them. So they may be resistant for that reason as well. One of the things that you can do is start leveraging them to figure out what were the back alley deals they were making, right? So now we can start to figure out some of those back alley deals may become a regular process, right? They may have been back alley deals because there is like no really good way to communicate to the DevOps team, right? And they've just kind of made friends with the DevOps manager or whatever, so we can start to use that as part of the Agile process for them being that point of contact for the DevOps team and getting the DevOps team involved. That way they can still be a rock star and they don't feel like their job's being threatened by an Agile process. Just one of the things that I've tried that's worked. So
Yeah, absolutely. And really what it comes down to, I think, is communication, eliminating waste, and continuous improvement.
did you read that off of a page somewhere? Or
No, that's...
Are you on the website right now?
No, that's, believe it or not, I know a little bit about this. Okay.
No, but great point. Continuous improvement is the biggest thing, right? That's if you wanna go somewhere and if you wanna tell someone what is the biggest gain that you get from whichever agile process you follow is the ability to always inspect, adapt, and improve. And there's no other process out there that to me has successful being able to do that for myself and for teams, right? So
yeah, and that's one of those things that probably needs to be said more often is that when you're talking about, whether you're talking about Scrum or Lean or some other Agile process, what's the SAFe? I can't remember what it stands for.
Scaled Agile Framework.
Yes. So no matter what you're doing, you should at some point, we talked about starting with the rules, right? Following the rules of Scrum and doing everything that Scrum prescribes that you do. But at some point, you should be inspecting and adapting and improving to the point where you decide to change or get rid of some of those things based on your own experience and your own measurements. This is an improvement over the base Scrum framework for our organization, right?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, and there's I know we're running out of time, but there's a few different new Agile scale type frameworks that are coming out now. You have SAFe, you have Scaled Agile, or Agile at Scale, I think it is, like the Scrum.org came out with. So there's a few others there's some interesting ones out there.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think of what are some of the other challenges that you face on a regular. I mean, you have like distributed teams is always one of those things that I get asked about all the time. How can we do Agile if we have a distributed team? So when you have a distributed team, do you guys Skype for your daily stand-up?
Yeah, we do Skype or we do Link. A lot of times we'll do a screen share so that everyone can see the board at the same time. But yeah, I treat it the exact same way as I would a co-located team. So I don't, same process. Obviously, there's some technology challenges there, but Skype is great for that, or Link or whatever, or Hangouts. So definitely don't let distance get in the way of you being able to follow Agile process.
Okay. Any parting words for anybody listening to the podcast that's maybe having trouble with their Agile transformation or thinking about doing one, other than call Esteban and go through it?
I think the main thing is one of the things I already said before is always start with the prescribed way of doing things and then start tweaking. Don't try to outsmart the frameworks. They're there because they've worked before. So just start there, and then just always be patient. Things will eventually start working the right way. It might take a couple iterations, but definitely stick with it. It definitely works.
All right, great. Thanks, Esteban, for coming on and sharing your wisdom. We always, like I said at the beginning of the podcast, we always appreciate when people take time away from business, work, family, etc., to come share their wisdom with us, and we really appreciate you coming on and talking to us.
Thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed talking to you guys.
Great. And that is another episode of Hallway Conversations. I am Phil Japixi, joined by Steve Boland, Lee Brandt, and our special guest, Esteban Garcia, and we will catch you on the next episode. Before we get into today's episode, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Redgate. Please take a moment to visit their website, www.red-gate.com, and check out their amazing products that they have to offer. Everything from SQL Server and Oracle development and administration, Azure development, database delivery, and .NET development. Thank you to our sponsor, Redgate. Please take a moment to visit red-gate.com, try out one of the fully functional trials, and thank them for sponsoring Hallway Conversations. Now, on with the show. So that was another episode of Hallway Conversations. If you'd like to listen to any of our older episodes, you can find them on our website, hallwayconversations.com. Subscribe to the RSS feed, as well as find us on iTunes, Xbox Music, and the Zune Marketplace. You'll find all the links you need right there on hallwayconversations.com. If you have any comments or questions, you can reach us at comments@hallwayconversations.com, and please follow us on Twitter @hallwayconvo. Thank you very much for listening, and have a great day. We'll talk to you soon.